Memories are a funny thing. They are also something to be cherished. My memories of Truxton basically consisted of me not wanting to buy it for my Megadrive. This was a vertical scrolling space shooter, and I had lost all interest in that genre by the time I even seen this game. I briefly remember walking past it in arcades and not paying it a blind bit of attention. And when I was coveting all those imported Megadrive screenshots in magazines in 1990, it was still a game I largely ignored. Even years later, when watching Classic Game Room on YouTube, possibly my favourite retro game channel on the net at that time, I still never gave it much thought. Anyone who has watched Mark from CGR talk about Truxton will know it is one of his favourite games of all time. A game he praises much praise upon. And still, I never ever thought about giving it a go. Even after I had discovered bullet hell shooters like Batsugan by Toaplan, I never thought to myself about looking at some other Toaplan games I missed. It was only after I made a series of bullet hell shooter videos that my mate asked me if I ever considered going back and playing older vertical space shooters, and that maybe one bad gaming experience of 1942 had caused me to miss out on some truly great games. And I had been thinking about that for quite some time, and so this is how we end up here, with me playing Truxton for the first time ever. Well, not quite the first time. I did play it 2 or 3 times before I recorded this footage. But this was a game I only played for the first time in June 2024. So, you kind of get what I mean. Truxton is a 1988 vertically scrolling shooter arcade video game originally developed by Toaplan and published in Japan and Europe by Taito, as well as in North America by Midway. Looking at the visuals, and this is something I do remember as I walked past it in arcades in the late 80s, even back then, I thought the visuals were no great shakes. Very bland looking indeed. And playing it for the first time, my opinion hasn't changed much on that front. They are still bland, dull, repetitive and uninspiring. And that was always a problem with these kinds of shooters. Set in space, everything was dark and motionless. There is nothing remarkable about these visuals at all. It just looked like every other vertical shooter out there, really. The sound, again, I am just left unimpressed with it. The sound effects are really annoying actually, and even in 1988, I think they could have been better than this. Some of the weaponry sounds like a kid making a laser blast whoop kind of effect. The explosions are just minor crackles, and there is no speech or anything from anyone that would try and encourage the player on. The music is fine, although it is very, very repetitive indeed. The opening level reminds me of that Roger Miller song that was used in Superman 3. You know, the one where Richard Pryor famously says,
"Both keys at the same time?"
They won't get me, indeed. Gameplay wise, it's a bit unique here. Players control their craft over a constantly scrolling background, and the scenery never stops moving, so the levels never seem to end, ever. The only indication you are facing a boss is when the music changes, so no mega bonus points tally here. In 1988, this would have been pretty different, but I feel I didn't miss out on much by simply ignoring it. The main ship only has 2 weapons. The main gun that travels a max distance of the screen's height, and 3 bombs capable of obliterating any enemy caught within its blast radius. So a clear screen weapon that doesn't even clear the screen. How pointless. But what that also does is add some challenge to the game. And this is one hell of a tough game to play. Even with slow moving enemies and slow moving enemy fire, I died a lot in this game. An awful lot. In most other vertical shooters, well, vertical shooters that are not tour plan ones, the enemies fire in this rather predictable wave pattern, so you could line up against a boss and not have to move to avoid enemy fire. But tour plan games, this doesn't seem to be the case. The enemy fire changes pattern and constantly moves towards you, so even avoiding enemy fire can result and you moving back into it, so it can be very frustrating at times. Now, I like a challenge in games, but this constantly unpredictable enemy fire, coupled with your fire obscuring enemy fire, makes it a certainty you are going to lose a lot of lives, an awful lot. At this point, I think by ignoring this game, I didn't miss out on much at all, and I am struggling to see why it garners such a loyal following. I really am. Truxton proved to be a commercial success for Tourplan among players in Japanese arcades, earning several awards from Games magazine. However, it was less successful in Western regions and was met with mixed reception from game magazines, which is where I kept seeing it for the Megadrive. And so this is a Megadrive version. Even by the time the Megadrive was officially launched into the UK, I was still not interested in this game. The magazine reviews had never been the greatest. I think early reviews stated it was a very accurate arcade port, but the game was awarded an average score of 82%. Even a mate of mine who loved shooters chose not to buy it. And it was a launch title, so when the machine first came out, it was everywhere. It was also quite telling how much I really hated this genre, as the day I got my Megadrive, I passed up the opportunity to own this game and opted to pick up Mystic Defender in the last battle instead. And both of those games were poor, and I knew they were poor, but still bought them instead. So now, after playing the arcade and not getting what the fuss is all about, I decided to play the Megadrive version, mainly because it was a game I could have bought. It was always on the shelves in those early days, so it wasn't hard to pick up a copy. And I have to say, I am surprised here. Pleasantly surprised. Truxton on the Mega Drive is a better game than the arcade version in my opinion. It's not a great game still, and it's a bit like asking yourself this: gonorrhea or herpes? Which is better? I mean, you don't want either of them, but both are unwanted gifts from a fun experience, right? And Truxton on the Mega Drive is actually a pretty fun game to play. I think overall it's a fairly accurate port of the arcade, with the same bland sprites and backgrounds, the same unimpressive sound effects, and fairly poor rendition of the arcade soundtrack. But the game is surprisingly better. For a start, I think it's ever so slightly more forgiving. That is to say, it's a little easier than the arcade, and the Mega Drive's weaker colour palette makes it that bit easier to see the enemy fire over your fire. But overall, it's an average game in my opinion, and I just cannot see what all the fuss was about. But just because it's not my cup of tea doesn't make it a bad game. It's just not a game for me, that's all. I know Mark from CGR loves the game, and I do love his enthusiasm for the game, I really do. I think it's great that he defends it to the hill, a game that was mostly panned by critics in the West. But Mark makes a case for the defence, and explains why the game means so much to him. And that's commendable. And I think it's what makes the world an interesting place. It would be so boring if we all liked the same things, wouldn't it? And that was my look at Truxton. If you liked this video, then please do give me a sub and a thumbs up, or maybe even a comment or two below about your memories of Truxton on any format. And a massive thank you to all of those who have subscribed and commented on my channel. Your feedback and support really does go a long way in helping the channel grow, and I do appreciate all of you, so it's a massive thank you from me. And that's all from me folks. Thanks for watching.
Look at all the photographs and every girl's dream, on every smile a memory of every place I've been. Redheads, blondes and cool brunettes, loved every girl I found, but I couldn't stick around too long. I like to spread myself around. They won't get me.